A millionaire is saved from a car accident by two homeless girls, but when he takes them into his home, he is surprised to find that the younger sister knows how to use expensive household appliances. The rain had turned relentless, drumming against the windshield like a drummer losing rhythm. Kenneth White gripped the steering wheel with one hand while the other scrolled through emails on his phone. The headlights from his luxury sedan barely penetrated the curtain of water falling from the heavens. Houston's streets, already ill-lit, shimmered with slick puddles that reflected the fractured glow of streetlights. "Mr. White, your meeting with Oaktree Capital is confirmed for Thursday," a voice crackled through his car's Bluetooth system. "Move it to Wednesday," Kenneth replied curtly, his eyes flicking between the road and his phone. The curve of the street snuck up on him. Tires skidded, finding no purchase on the waterlogged asphalt. The crash wasn't loud, but the force reverberated through the car like a punch to the gut. Kenneth's head snapped forward, restrained only by the seatbelt, and his phone clattered to the floor. The hood of the car crumpled against the street lamp like foil, steam hissing as rain met hot metal. Across the street, Claire crouched in the shadows of a crumbling alleyway, her thin arms elbow-deep in a trash can. She winced as the sharp edge of a can nicked her hand. "Almost got it," she muttered, extracting a stale piece of bread wrapped in plastic. Nearby, Anna huddled under an overhang, clutching an oversized sweatshirt that swamped her tiny frame. "Claire," she whispered, her voice soft but urgent. "What was that?" Claire turned, squinting into the rain. "Stay here," she said, already moving toward the sound. Her bare feet splashed through the puddles as she peered down the street. The faint glow of headlights illuminated the twisted wreckage of a car. "Wait!" Anna's small legs struggled to keep up, but Claire didn't slow. They reached the car, the rain making it hard to see through the cracked glass. Kenneth's figure slumped in the driver's seat, his head resting at an odd angle. Steam curled from the engine like ghostly fingers. Claire pounded on the window. "Hey, can you hear me?" A groan answered her. His hand moved sluggishly toward the door handle, but failed to grip it. "Come on, we have to help him." Anna tugged at Claire's arm, her wide eyes reflecting the pale glow of the street lamp. Claire's jaw tightened. "Help me pull the door," she said, wrapping her fingers around the handle. Together they yanked with all their strength, but the door wouldn't budge. Rain ran down Claire's face, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks as she scanned the scene. "Stay back," she ordered, grabbing a loose piece of brick from the side of the road. With a determined swing, she shattered the window. Glass rained down on the car seats, and Kenneth flinched. His bloodied face turned toward them, eyes half-lidded and dazed. "Come on!" Claire reached inside, fumbling with the seatbelt. It clicked free, and she leaned back. "Anna, help me pull him out." Anna hesitated, her small hands hovering uncertainly, but then she grabbed Kenneth's wrist with a surprising firmness. Together, the two girls hauled him out of the car. His tall, muscular frame sagged between them, his designer suit soaked and smeared with streaks of blood and grime. The rain had washed the last of his imposing presence away, leaving behind a vulnerable, broken man. Kenneth's lips moved, but his voice was barely audible. "What? You crashed," Claire said bluntly, shifting his weight to keep him upright. "We're getting you help." A car passed slowly, its headlights illuminating the three of them like a moment captured in time. But the driver didn't stop, the taillights disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they came. "There's a clinic down the block," Claire said, more to herself than Anna. "We'll take him there." "Is he going to be okay?" Anna asked, her voice trembling as she looked up at Kenneth's pale, slack face. Claire tightened her grip on his arm. "He doesn't have a choice." The waiting room of the clinic smelled of antiseptic and damp clothing. Claire and Anna sat on a cracked vinyl bench, their clothes soaked through and sticking to their skin. The faint hum of a vending machine filled the silence as they waited for news. Anna leaned her head on Claire's shoulder, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Do you think he's mad at us?" she whispered. Claire brushed a strand of wet hair from her sister's face. "He'd be madder if we didn't do anything." As the clinic door creaked open, a nurse stepped out, clipboard in hand. She looked at the two bedraggled figures on the bench. "He's stable," she said, her voice gentle. "Are you girls okay?" Claire glanced at Anna before answering. "We're fine." But as she sat back, her eyes lingered on the closed door behind the nurse. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, the man they had just saved felt like the beginning of something they couldn't walk away from. The smell of disinfectant and faint whispers brought Kenneth White back to consciousness. His head throbbed, a dull pain radiating from his temple. Blinking against the harsh fluorescence overhead, he became aware of the scratchy feel of hospital sheets and the stiff pillow beneath his neck. The room was quiet, except for the faint beeping of monitors nearby. Kenneth shifted slightly, wincing as his muscles protested. He tried piecing together the scattered fragments of memory, the rain, the crash, the weightlessness as control of the car slipped from his hands. The rest was hazy, but there was something else, a pair of voices. He turned his head toward the narrow window by the door. Beyond it, two small figures sat huddled on a bench. A girl, no older than 12, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed tightly, her head tilted back in exhaustion. Beside her, a younger child rested with her knees drawn up to her chest, clutching the hem of an oversized sweatshirt. Both were soaked, their damp clothes clinging to their thin frames, their faces pale against the artificial glow of the hallway lights. Kenneth kept his gaze fixed on the older girl. Even from a distance, her eyes conveyed a sense of caution, calculation, and a maturity far beyond her years. She turned her head slightly, catching his glance, and quickly looked away, pulling the younger one closer, as though shielding her from his sight. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Good to see you awake, Mr. White," she said briskly, glancing at the monitors. "You've had a rough night. You were lucky someone found you when they did." "Those girls," Kenneth murmured, his voice rough from disuse. The nurse followed his line of sight and smiled faintly. "They brought you in, said they saw your car crash and didn't hesitate to help." She paused, her tone softening. "I think they've been waiting here ever since." Kenneth's brow furrowed. "Waiting? For him?" "They don't have anyone else," the nurse added, as though reading his thoughts. "No family listed. Just out there on their own." Kenneth pushed himself upright, ignoring the protest from his ribs. The nurse moved to steady him, but he waved her off. "Bring them in," he said, his voice regaining its usual edge. Moments later, the door creaked again, and the two girls entered hesitantly. The older one stayed near the threshold, her shoulders square despite her shivering frame, while the younger clung to her side, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. Kenneth studied them in silence for a moment, unsure where to begin. He wasn't used to this, conversations laced with gratitude or personal connection. His world revolved around contracts, transactions, and measured words. "You brought me here," he finally said, his tone more of a statement than a question. The older girl nodded, her jaw set in defiance. "You were in trouble. Someone had to." Kenneth's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. There was a sharpness in her tone, a refusal to let kindness seem like weakness. The younger one stepped forward, her voice small but clear. "Are you okay now?" Kenneth blinked, momentarily taken aback. "I'll be fine," he said after a pause. "Good." The younger girl smiled faintly, her relief unspoken but visible in the way her grip on her sister's sleeve loosened. Kenneth's gaze flicked back to the older one. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then replied, "Claire." "And hers?" "Anna." Kenneth leaned back slightly, the stiffness in his posture softening. Claire. Anna, you could have walked away. Why didn't you? Claire lifted her chin. Because you needed help. Once again it was straightforward and unadorned, no embellishments. The silence stretched, and Kenneth found himself grappling with an unfamiliar unease. He cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. Where are you staying? Claire's expression hardened. We're fine. Kenneth raised an eyebrow. You don't look fine. It's pouring out there. Kenneth pressed, gesturing vaguely toward the window. Rain streaked the glass in chaotic patterns. You can't go back wherever you came from. Stay at my place tonight, just until the storm clears. Claire's lips tightened. No thanks. You're not, Kenneth countered, his voice growing sharper. Look at her. He nodded toward Anna, who was now shivering visibly despite her effort to appear calm. She's soaked, probably hungry. You're going to let her stay out in this? The guilt took hold. Claire's jaw clenched, and she looked away. We'll be okay. The tension in the air was palpable, but before Claire could retort, Anna tugged on her sleeve. It's okay, she whispered. Maybe he can help. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing at Kenneth, as if trying to decipher his intentions. Look, Kenneth said, his tone more deliberate now, I'm not offering charity. You helped me when you didn't have to. Let me return the favor. One night, a roof over your head, no strings. The pause was excruciating, but finally Claire nodded, barely. Kenneth exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Fine, I'll have my driver take us back. As the girls followed the nurse out to gather their meager belongings, Kenneth sat back, staring at the closed door. For the first time in years, the sterile predictability of his life felt altered. And as much as he hated to admit it, he wasn't sure if he wanted it to return to the way it had been. The rain had eased to a soft drizzle by the time Kenneth's sleek black car rolled up to the gates of his mansion. The towering iron bars groaned as they opened, revealing a long, winding driveway bordered by meticulously trimmed hedges. Beyond them, the pale glow of the mansion's windows flickered like silent invitations into a world far removed from the chaos of the storm. Claire sat rigid in the back seat, her arms crossed tightly. Every bump on the road seemed to deepen the furrow in her brow. Beside her, Anna leaned forward, her small face pressed against the glass, eyes wide as they soaked in the grandeur. Is that a fountain? Anna whispered, pointing to the marble structure at the center of the circular driveway. Water cascaded elegantly from a stone cherub's outstretched hands. It's just a fountain, Claire muttered, pulling Anna back into her seat. Kenneth glanced at them through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The car stopped smoothly at the entrance, where a butler opened the door with practiced precision. The man raised an eyebrow at the disheveled state of the two girls, but wisely kept his comments to himself. Follow me, Kenneth said, as he stepped out, his tone brisk but not unkind. Inside, the mansion's vastness seemed to stretch endlessly. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the faint scent of polished wood hung in the air. Anna's footsteps faltered as she took in the high ceilings and sprawling staircase. Claire, on the other hand, stayed close to Anna, her sharp eyes darting around the room as if expecting a trap. It's too clean, she muttered under her breath. Do you live here alone? Anna asked, her voice echoing faintly in the cavernous space. Yes, Kenneth replied, removing his jacket and handing it to the butler. It's just me. Anna looked puzzled. No family? Kenneth hesitated for a fraction of a second. No. Must get lonely, Anna said softly. Claire shot her a warning look, but Kenneth's lips twitched into a faint smile, an expression so rare it almost startled him. Not something I think about, he said, leading them into a smaller, cozier room off the main hall. The sitting room was no less luxurious, with plush leather couches and a roaring fireplace. A maid appeared with towels, which Kenneth handed to the girls without ceremony. "Dry off. I'll have something brought in for you to eat," he said. Anna wrapped herself in a towel, sighing as the warmth seeped into her skin. "This place is like a movie," she murmured, her wide eyes tracing the intricate patterns on the wallpaper. "It's just a house," Claire said flatly, though her hand instinctively rested on Anna's shoulder, grounding her. Kenneth lingered by the door, observing the stark contrast between the two girls. Anna's awe was unguarded, almost innocent, while Claire's every movement screamed suspicion. She flinched when the maid returned with steaming bowls of soup, as though the offer of food might be laced with a hidden agenda. "You'll sleep upstairs," Kenneth said, his tone neutral but firm. "Separate rooms if you want them." "No," Claire said immediately. "We stay together." Kenneth nodded once, unbothered by her defiance. "Fine. The guest room's large enough." Anna smiled up at Claire, tugging on her arm. "See? It's okay." Claire said nothing, her gaze fixed on Kenneth, as if daring him to make a wrong move. Later that evening, Kenneth sat in his study, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving the night eerily quiet. He stared out the window at the faint outline of the fountain, his mind replaying the events of the day. He thought of Anna's small hands clutching the towel, her wide eyes lighting up at the sight of the fireplace, and then of Claire, standing rigid, her eyes wary, her words clipped. Kenneth wasn't a sentimental man, but something about the girls unsettled him, not in a way he disliked, but in a way he couldn't quite place. They were strangers, yet their presence in his home didn't feel intrusive. Instead, it filled a void he hadn't realized was there. The faint sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Peering into the hallway, he saw Anna tiptoeing toward the kitchen. "What are you doing up?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Anna froze, then turned sheepishly. I was thirsty." Kenneth nodded toward the kitchen. "Go ahead, help yourself." She hesitated for a moment before slipping inside. Kenneth followed, leaning against the doorframe as she searched for a glass. Without hesitation, Anna reached for the cabinet closest to the sink, pulling out exactly what she needed. "You seem to know your way around," Kenneth remarked casually. Anna froze, the glass halfway to the faucet. "Just a guess," she said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Kenneth said nothing, but the way she avoided his eyes stayed with him long after she'd returned to bed. Back in his study, Kenneth stared into his empty glass. The girls were more than what they seemed, and for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to unravel a mystery that wasn't tied to a profit margin. Morning brought sunlight streaming through the wide windows of Kenneth's mansion, spilling golden light over marble floors and casting long, quiet shadows. The house was too still for his liking. It made every small sound, footsteps, muffled voices, the hum of the coffee machine, seem louder than it was. In the kitchen, Kenneth leaned against the granite countertop, his gaze fixed on Anna, who stood on her toes, expertly working the sleek espresso machine that rarely saw use. The child's small fingers moved with precision, tapping buttons and twisting knobs as though she had done it 100 times before. "You're good at that," Kenneth said, keeping his tone light, though his curiosity sharpened. Anna glanced at him, a quick, almost nervous flick of her eyes. "I just watched you do it yesterday," she said. Despite her careful words, there was a hint of uncertainty, a break in the confidence she attempted to convey. "Watched me?" Kenneth raised an eyebrow. "I didn't even know how to work that thing without looking at the manual." Anna shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "It's not that hard." She slid a steaming cup across the counter toward him before retreating to the safety of the kitchen table. Claire sat nearby, chewing on a piece of toast with all the enthusiasm of someone eating cardboard. She didn't miss the exchange, her sharp eyes darting between Kenneth and Anna. "She's just good with machines," Claire said, her tone defensive, as though preemptively cutting off any further questions. Kenneth took a sip of the coffee, letting the silence hang for a moment. "Is that right?" "Yeah," Claire said firmly. She pushed her plate aside and leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "She's smart. Figures stuff out quick." Anna looked down at her lap, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "Not that smart," she murmured. Kenneth set the cup down with a soft clink, his eyes never leaving the two girls. "Where'd you learn?" he asked, his question directed at Anna, but meant for both. Anna hesitated, the weight of the question pressing on her small shoulders. "I just picked things up," she said vaguely. "Used to be around people who had stuff like this." "Stuff like this," Kenneth repeated, his voice calm but probing. Anna's hands stilled, and she glanced at Claire, a silent plea for help passing between them. Claire straightened, her expression hardening. "We don't talk about that," Claire said flatly, her tone like a wall slamming shut. "We're here now. That's all that matters." Kenneth leaned back against the counter, studying the two of them. There was a quiet protectiveness in the way Claire shifted her chair slightly closer to Anna, as though she could physically shield her from questions. "I'm just trying to understand," Kenneth said, his voice softening. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Understand what? That we don't have a place to go? That we're just trying to get through the day? You think you can fix everything because you've got a big house and fancy coffee machines?" Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, Kenneth said nothing. It wasn't the anger in her voice that struck him, but the raw fear beneath it. The kind of fear that came from living too many days, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. "I'm not trying to fix anything," Kenneth said finally. "But you can't expect me not to ask questions when the two of you show up knowing things most kids your age wouldn't." Anna's voice was small, almost swallowed by the room. "We're not trying to make trouble." Claire's hand landed lightly on Anna's, a silent reassurance. "We don't need to tell you everything," she said, her tone less defensive now, more resolute. Kenneth studied her for a moment longer before nodding. "Fair enough," he said. "But if there's something you need, food, clothes, anything, you just ask." Neither girl responded, but the tension in Claire's shoulders eased just a fraction. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Kenneth retreated to his study, but his thoughts kept circling back to the kitchen, to Anna's nimble hands, and the fleeting look of unease in her eyes. There was a story there, one she wasn't ready to tell. From his desk, Kenneth could hear faint voices from the sitting room. He rose and walked to the doorway, peering around the corner. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through one of the oversized books from his shelves, her face lit with genuine curiosity. Claire sat nearby, her body angled toward the door, as though she expected trouble to come through at any moment. Kenneth lingered in the shadows, watching them. The pieces didn't fit yet, but he had time. For now, he would let them settle, let the mansion's walls become less intimidating, and let trust take root. And when they were ready, he would be there to listen. The afternoon sun streamed through the sitting room's tall windows, casting warm patterns on the polished wooden floors. The mansion was quiet, save for the occasional distant hum of a vacuum or the soft rustling of pages. Anna sat on the oversized rug, a thick book resting on her lap. Her legs were crossed, her small body hunched slightly forward as she traced her finger along the words, her lips moving silently as she read. Claire was perched nearby on the arm of a leather chair, her watchful eyes fixed on the doorway. She tapped her foot lightly against the chair's side, her expression tense, as though waiting for something or someone to disrupt their fragile peace. Kenneth appeared in the doorway, his footsteps deliberately soft. He leaned casually against the frame, observing the scene for a moment. The juxtaposition of the two girls, Anna, absorbed in curiosity, and Claire, wound tight like a spring, struck him. "You like reading, Anna?" Kenneth asked, breaking the quiet. Anna looked up, startled but not afraid. She nodded. Mama taught me. She said books were magic. Her voice was wistful, and her gaze drifted back to the page. Claire's foot stilled, and she shot Kenneth a wary glance. Is this going to be another round of questions? She asked, her tone sharp but tired. Kenneth ignored the jab and moved to sit on the couch across from them. No questions, he said simply, though his eyes lingered on Anna. Anna hesitated, her finger frozen mid-sentence. She looked at Claire for reassurance, then back at Kenneth. She whispered, Mama used to read to me. Kenneth leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. What did she like to read? Fairy tales, Anna replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She said they made the world feel less heavy. Her voice trailed off, and she closed the book gently, hugging it to her chest. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her fingers drumming against the chair's arm. Anna, it's okay, Anna said softly, glancing up at her sister. It's just memories. Kenneth remained silent, letting the moment stretch. Anna looked down at the rug, her fingers playing with the edge of the book's cover. We lived in a big house, she began, her words slow, as though each one had to be carefully pulled from her memory. It had tall windows, kind of like here. Mama worked a lot. She said we had to, or... Her voice faltered, and she shook her head. She just worked a lot. Kenneth's chest tightened at the quiet resignation in her voice. What about after? He asked gently. Anna's hands stilled, and she bit her lip. After Mama got sick, everything changed, she said, her voice breaking slightly. There were people. They weren't nice. They didn't want me there. They said I didn't belong. The room appeared to be in a state of tension. Claire's jaw tightened, and she moved to sit beside Anna, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. That's enough, she said firmly, glaring at Kenneth as though daring him to push further. I'm not trying to upset her, Kenneth said, his voice calm but steady. You don't get it, Claire snapped. Talking about it doesn't make it better. It just makes it worse. Anna shook her head, her small fingers clutching the book tighter. It's okay, Claire, she murmured. She turned to Kenneth, her eyes wide but resolute. Mama told me to be brave, even when it's hard. Kenneth nodded, his expression softening. Your mother sounds like she was a strong woman. Anna's face lit up briefly, a flicker of pride breaking through the sadness. She was the best. She always made me feel safe, even when... Her voice trailed off, and she looked away. Kenneth leaned back, giving her space. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, he said. Anna nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you, she said softly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Claire held Anna close, her protective instincts as sharp as ever, while Kenneth sat quietly, his mind racing with unspoken thoughts. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Kenneth stood and walked to the window, staring out at the sprawling lawn beyond. He couldn't shake the image of Anna clutching that book, her voice trembling as she spoke of a life that had clearly been far from kind. For the first time in years, Kenneth felt something stir in him, a need to protect, to shield. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to entertain in a long time, but now it was undeniable. Turning back to the room, he watched the two girls settle into the quiet, their bond as unyielding as steel. Whatever had brought them here, Kenneth thought, they weren't just a mystery to be solved. They were a responsibility. And for once, he didn't feel the urge to walk away. Leave a comment, coffee, if you feel this is a touching story worth listening to. The crisp afternoon air carried a hint of warmth, the sun casting its golden light over Kenneth's sprawling lawn. Anna darted through the garden, her laughter carrying faintly through the open windows of the mansion. She twirled in the dappled sunlight, her small hands outstretched, as if trying to catch the rays themselves. The sight was rare. a moment where the weight of her past seemed to lift, leaving behind a carefree child. Kenneth stood by the study window, arms crossed. He watched her for a moment, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. Claire, ever the guardian, sat nearby on the garden steps, her eyes never straying far from Anna. The sound of a car pulling up the driveway broke the peace. Kenneth glanced at the clock before stepping away from the window. Although he hadn't anticipated Zachary Bryant's early arrival, Bryant had never been known for his punctuality. Moments later, Kenneth greeted his guest in the grand foyer. Zachary Bryant strode in, his tailored suit and polished demeanor exuding the practiced charm of a seasoned businessman. His handshake was firm, his smile all surface. "Mr. White," Zachary said smoothly. "Lovely place you've got here. Makes a man envious." Kenneth gestured toward the sitting room. "Let's get this over with," he said flatly. As they settled into chairs, Kenneth noticed Zachary's gaze drifting toward the open windows. Something outside caught his attention. Kenneth followed his line of sight and saw Anna darting between rows of blooming roses. "She's lively," Zachary remarked casually, though his voice held an edge. Kenneth stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Just a couple of kids staying here for a while." Zachary's smile flickered, a calculated expression slipping into place. "How charitable of you." Kenneth ignored the comment, steering the conversation back to business. For the next half hour, figures and projections filled the air, but Zachary's focus kept wavering. His gaze flicked toward the garden more often than Kenneth liked. When the meeting concluded, Kenneth walked Zachary to the door, his instincts prickling with unease. As the car disappeared down the driveway, he returned to the study, the nagging sense of something left unsaid gnawing at him. Outside, Anna crouched near the garden fountain, her fingers tracing the cool marble. The sudden sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. Turning, she saw a tall figure looming over her. "Hello, Anna," Zachary said, his voice low and measured. Anna's stomach contorted into knots. She stumbled to her feet, backing away. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. Zachary stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel. "I might ask you the same thing," he said, his smile sharp. "Didn't I make it clear that you shouldn't be seen? And yet here you are, parading around like you belong." "I didn't do anything," Anna stammered, her hands gripping the hem of her dress. Zachary's smile vanished, replaced by cold steel in his eyes. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed. "You stay quiet. You don't tell anyone who I am or what I've done for you. You understand me?" Anna nodded quickly, her heart pounding so loudly she thought he might hear it. Zachary crouched slightly, bringing himself to her level. "Good, because if you don't, things will get complicated, and I don't think either of us wants that." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Zachary straightened and walked away without another glance, leaving Anna frozen in place. When Anna returned to the house, her face was pale, her steps hesitant. Claire noticed immediately, rising from the couch. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Nothing," Anna mumbled, avoiding her sister's eyes. She moved toward the staircase, her small frame seeming to shrink under the weight of an invisible burden. Claire followed her, grabbing her arm gently. "Anna, tell me." "I'm fine," Anna insisted, pulling away. Her voice was barely audible. "I just need to lie down." Kenneth, who had been watching from the hallway, stepped forward. "Anna, is something wrong?" Anna flinched at his voice, but didn't turn around. "Number." "I'm just tired," she said, her tone flat and distant. Without another word, she disappeared up the stairs. Kenneth exchanged a look with Claire, his brow furrowing. "She's never that quiet," he said softly. Claire crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "She doesn't talk about stuff if she doesn't want to. She'll tell me when she's ready." "Maybe," Kenneth said, though doubt lingered in his voice. The silence that followed was uneasy, filled with questions neither of them dared to voice. Upstairs, behind the closed door of the guest room, Anna sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. She had been brave before, but Zachary's shadow felt too large to escape. The late morning sun streamed through Kenneth's study, glinting off the polished wood of his desk. He sat with his coffee untouched, staring blankly at the open ledger in front of him. His thoughts kept drifting to Anna. The withdrawn silence, the haunted look in her eyes, it gnawed at him, an unwelcome weight he couldn't shake. A distant knock echoed through the quiet mansion. Kenneth frowned, glancing at the time. He wasn't expecting anyone. Rising, he made his way to the foyer, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Claire was already at the door, standing slightly in front of Anna, as though shielding her from whatever lay on the other side. Kenneth noted her tense posture, the way her small frame seemed to expand with defiance. The butler opened the door, and a tall man stepped inside. His rugged appearance, broad shoulders, a weathered face, and a military duffel slung over one arm, made him seem out of place in the elegant entryway. "Samuel." Anna's voice broke the heavy silence. Her wide eyes filled with recognition, and before anyone could react, she sprinted toward him. The man dropped his bag, catching her in a fierce hug. "Anna," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It's really you." Kenneth exchanged a glance with Claire, whose wary expression softened ever so slightly. "Who is he?" Claire asked, her tone guarded. Samuel pulled back slightly, crouching to Anna's level, as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I'm her uncle," he said, his voice steady but kind. "My name's Samuel. Helen was my sister." Claire's gaze flickered between Anna and Samuel before settling on Kenneth. "Is he telling the truth?" Kenneth raised a hand, his brow furrowed in thought. "Let's take this to the sitting room," he suggested. In the sitting room, Anna clung to Samuel's side, her small fingers gripping his sleeve like a lifeline. Kenneth watched the two from his armchair, noting the ease with which Samuel seemed to comfort her. "I've been looking for her for months," Samuel began, his voice tinged with frustration and relief. "After Helen passed, I tried to find out what happened to Anna, but her father wasn't exactly forthcoming." Kenneth's jaw tightened at the mention of Zachary. "Her father doesn't strike me as the nurturing type." Samuel's face darkened. "That's an understatement." Anna shifted slightly, her gaze dropping to the floor. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You don't have to hold it all in anymore." The room grew still. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Kenneth leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Anna's voice was small, almost hesitant. "Mama was sick," she began. "She tried to hide it, but I knew." Her fingers twisted the hem of her dress. When she was gone, I thought I'd be okay because I still had him. My father. Zachary Bryant." "Zachary," Kenneth said softly, piecing it together. Anna nodded, her eyes glistening. "But he didn't want me. Not really. He let me stay, but only because Mama begged him to before she left." Her voice cracked, and she took a shuddering breath. "There were other people in the house," Anna continued, her voice trembling. "Catherine and Carlos. They hated me. Catherine said I didn't belong, and Carlos—" She swallowed hard, her shoulders trembling. "What did Carlos do?" Kenneth asked, his voice unusually gentle. He'd push me, call me names. Once, he locked me in the pantry because I accidentally spilled juice on his shoes." She hugged herself, as though trying to make herself smaller. "And Zachary didn't care. He said I should learn to be careful." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Samuel's hand tightened on Anna's shoulder. "You should have never been there in the first place," he said, his voice firm but laced with sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Anna." Kenneth stood abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the garden. his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And he has the audacity to threaten her even now," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Claire moved to Anna's side, her usual sharpness replaced with quiet compassion. "You don't have to go back there," she said. "Not ever." Anna looked up at her sister figure, a faint glimmer of hope breaking through the fear in her eyes. "You'll stay here as long as you need," Kenneth added, his voice steady. He turned to Samuel. "If you want her to come with you eventually, that's fine. But for now, she's not going anywhere near him." Samuel studied Kenneth for a long moment before nodding. "I'll trust you with her for now, but I'm not leaving Houston. Not until I know she's safe." Kenneth's lips quirked into a faint smile. "You'll find I take safety very seriously." Anna looked between the two men, her grip on Samuel's sleeve loosening slightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, the shadows of her past seemed to shrink, just a little. Kenneth adjusted his tie as he strode into the conference room, his expression calm, but his mind a storm of thoughts. The spacious room, with its sleek glass table and cityscape view, was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Zachary Bryant sat at the far end, radiating his usual air of calculated arrogance. "White," Zachary greeted, rising to extend a hand. His polished smile didn't reach his eyes. Kenneth ignored the gesture and dropped a folder on the table. "Let's delve straight into the matter." Zachary's smile faltered, and he sank back into his chair. "Straight to business, then. Fine by me." Kenneth's jaw tightened as he remained standing, looming over the table. "This isn't about business, Zachary. It's about Anna." The flicker of surprise in Zachary's eyes was quickly masked by indifference. "Anna? I don't see how she concerns you," Kenneth said sharply. "She worries me because she lives under my roof, and because I've heard what she's been through." He leaned forward, his hands braced against the table. "Your daughter, your responsibility, or at least she should have been." Zachary's expression hardened, his smooth facade beginning to crack. "I don't know what she's been telling you, but I gave her everything she needed. A roof, food. That's more than most would have done." Kenneth's laugh was cold and humorless. "You call that parenting? Letting her be mistreated in her own home while you turned a blind eye? She's a child, Zachary. Your child." Zachary's lips thinned. "You have no idea what it's like to manage a family and a legacy like mine. I did what I could. It wasn't perfect, but—" "It wasn't anything," Kenneth interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. "You abandoned her in every way that mattered. And now you have the audacity to threaten her." Zachary's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't know how to keep her place. She's always been difficult. I did what I had to." Kenneth straightened, his voice cold and unyielding. "Number what you did was fail her, and you'll fail her no longer. Effective immediately, I'm severing all ties with you and your company." Zachary's composure shattered. "What?" he spat, rising from his chair. "You can't be serious. Do you have any idea what you're walking away from?" "I know exactly what I'm walking away from," Kenneth said calmly, gathering his papers. "I won't stand by while you continue to hurt her. If severing ties with you is necessary to ensure her safety, then so be it." Zachary's fists clenched, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You think you can play the hero? You're just a businessman, White. You don't know what you're getting into." Kenneth stared him down, his expression unflinching. "I know enough to see the kind of man you are, and I have no interest in being associated with you anymore." Without waiting for a response, Kenneth turned and walked out, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Back at the mansion, Claire sat cross-legged on the floor of the guest room, holding a book open in her lap. Anna sat beside her, quiet but relaxed, her head resting against Claire's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, you know," Claire said suddenly, her voice soft but firm. Anna tilted her head, glancing up at her. "I know," she murmured. Claire closed the book, turning to face her fully. "I mean it, Anna. Whatever happens, we're in this together." Anna smiled faintly, the tension in her small shoulders easing just a little. "Thanks, Claire." Kenneth's footsteps echoed down the hall before he appeared in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his expression tired, but resolute. "How are you both holding up?" "Fine," Claire answered quickly, but her eyes searched his face. "What happened?" Kenneth leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I cut ties with him," he said simply. Anna sat up straighter, her eyes wide. "With my father?" "Yes," Kenneth said, meeting her gaze. "I won't let him near you again, Anna. Not while you're here." The room was silent for a moment, and then Anna stood, crossing the space between them. She wrapped her small arms around Kenneth's waist, holding on tightly. Kenneth froze, taken aback by the unexpected gesture. Slowly, he rested a hand on her back, his grip gentle but firm. "Thank you," Anna whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Claire watched the exchange, her sharp edges softening. She stood and joined them, her hand resting lightly on Anna's shoulder. For the first time in a long while, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Kenneth looked down at the two girls, a quiet determination settling over him. They were his responsibility now, and he would not fail them. The news shook the city's business circles. Kenneth White's decision to sever ties with Bryant Enterprises wasn't just a routine business move. It was a seismic shift that rippled through the financial world. Other partners, long wary of Zachary Bryant's methods but hesitant to challenge his influence, suddenly had reason to dig deeper. The whispers started small. Discrepancies in accounting, questionable contracts, the kind of inconsistencies that raised eyebrows when someone as prominent as Kenneth White stepped away. By the end of the week, those whispers had grown into a storm of scrutiny. Reporters camped outside Bryant's office, their cameras flashing every time Zachary stepped out, his usual polished demeanor cracking under the pressure. Financial regulators launched investigations, uncovering a tangled web of fraud and embezzlement that had been hidden beneath the company's pristine surface for years. Inside his opulent mansion, Zachary paced the marble floors, barking orders into his phone. "Fix this," he snapped. "I don't care how, just make it go away." But it was too late. The house of cards he'd built was collapsing, and no amount of threats or bribes could hold it together. When the police arrived, the Bryant mansion was eerily quiet. Catherine sat in the living room, her manicured nails tapping nervously against a crystal tumbler of whiskey. She glanced up as the officers entered, her face a mask of indignation. "You can't just barge in here," she hissed, rising from the couch. "Ma'am," one of the officers said calmly, "we have a warrant." Behind them, Zachary descended the grand staircase, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "This is absurd," he barked. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Mr. Bryant," the officer said, his tone even. "And that's exactly why we're here." Carlos appeared at the top of the stairs, his phone clutched in one hand. "Dad, what's going on?" he called, his voice shaking. Zachary didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the officers, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You'll regret this." But the officers remained unmoved, reading him his rights as they cuffed him. Catherine's protests turned to shrieks, while Carlos stood frozen, his face pale. The family who once commanded fear and respect now faced public humiliation. Their downfall splashed across every headline. Back at Kenneth's mansion, the atmosphere was calm but reflective. Anna sat in the kitchen, carefully arranging slices of fruit on a plate. Claire leaned against the counter, watching her sister figure with quiet amusement. "You don't have to make it so perfect, you know," Claire teased. Anna smiled faintly. "I just want it to look nice." Kenneth entered, loosening his tie as he approached the counter. "What's all this?" he asked, nodding toward the neatly arranged fruit. "Breakfast," Anna said simply. Kenneth smiled, his expression softening. It looks great. As they sat down together, the news played quietly on the television in the background. The anchor's voice detailed the latest developments in the Bryant scandal: embezzlement charges, police raids, and frozen assets. Anna's hand hesitated over her plate, her expression unreadable. Claire reached over, placing a hand on hers. "Hey," she said softly. "It's over. They can't hurt you anymore." Anna nodded slowly, her grip on her fork tightening. "I know," she whispered. Kenneth cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "You're safe here," he said firmly, his gaze meeting Anna's. "And I'll make sure it stays that way." For the first time in days, Anna's shoulders relaxed. She glanced at Claire, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then at Kenneth, whose steady presence felt like an anchor in the storm. "Thank you," Anna said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Kenneth nodded, his usual stoic demeanor softening. "You don't have to thank me. This is your home now." As they continued their breakfast, the mansion felt warm, alive in a way it hadn't before. Kenneth watched the two girls, their bond unspoken but unbreakable, and felt a quiet satisfaction. The Bryant's empire may have fallen, but here, in the safety of his home, a new foundation was being built, one rooted in trust, care, and the promise of a better future. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of Kenneth's study, bathing the room in a golden glow. The air's warmth contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere inside. Samuel sat across from Kenneth, his rugged hands resting on his knees. His presence filled the room with quiet strength, yet his eyes held a mixture of resolve and sadness. "I've found a place here in Houston," Samuel said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady but tinged with hesitation. "It's not grandiose, but it's close enough for me to monitor Anna. She's my family, Kenneth. I need to do right by her." Kenneth leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And you think taking her is the right thing?" Samuel nodded. "She's been through enough. She deserves stability, a fresh start with someone who knows her past and can help her heal." Kenneth glanced out the window, watching Anna and Claire in the garden below. Anna was perched on the edge of the fountain, her feet dangling as Claire gestured animatedly, her protective nature as visible as ever. "She's built something here," Kenneth said after a pause. "A bond with Claire, with me. It's not just about her past. It's about where she feels safe now." Samuel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I'm not trying to take that away. I'll make sure she knows she can still see you both. But she's my niece, Kenneth. She's the only family I have left." When Samuel shared his proposal with Anna, her reaction was immediate, a mix of shock and uncertainty. She stared at him, her wide eyes flickering between hope and fear. "You want me to live with you?" she asked quietly. Samuel knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "I do. I've settled nearby so we can be close to Kenneth and Claire. You'd have your own room, and I'd be there for you every day." Anna looked down, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "But I like it here. Claire's my family too." Samuel nodded, his voice gentle. "I know she is, and I'd never stop you from seeing her. This isn't about taking you away. It's about giving you the family you've always deserved." Claire, sitting nearby, stayed silent, her usual sharpness muted by the weight of the moment. The farewell came 2 days later, on a quiet afternoon. Kenneth, Claire, Anna, and Samuel stood by the mansion's grand entryway, the car waiting at the base of the steps. Anna clung to Claire, tears streaming down her face. "I'll visit," she said, her voice trembling. "I promise." Claire hugged her tightly, her own eyes glistening but determined not to cry. "You better," she said, her tone light but laced with emotion. "And if Samuel messes up, you call me, okay?" Anna let out a small laugh, nodding against Claire's shoulder. Kenneth approached, his usual stoic demeanor softened. He crouched slightly, placing a hand on Anna's shoulder. "You're always welcome here, Anna. Remember that." Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. White, for everything." Kenneth shook his head. "It's Kenneth, and you don't need to thank me." Samuel stepped forward, his hand on Anna's back. "We'll visit soon," he said, addressing Kenneth and Claire. "She won't forget where she belongs." As the car pulled away, Claire stood on the steps, watching until it disappeared from view. Kenneth placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. "She'll be okay," Claire said quietly, though her voice wavered. Kenneth looked down at her, his expression filled with quiet determination. "And so will you. This is your home, Claire. It always will be." Claire turned to him, her usual guarded expression replaced by something softer. "You mean that?" Kenneth nodded. "I've already started the paperwork. You're not just staying here, you're staying here for good." Claire's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and relief washing over her. "You're adopting me?" "Yes," Kenneth said simply, "if you'll have me." Claire blinked rapidly, her defenses momentarily crumbling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Kenneth replied, his voice steady. "Just know that this is your home, Claire, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long while, Claire let herself believe it. She stepped forward and hugged Kenneth, her arms wrapping tightly around him. "Thank you," she whispered. Kenneth rested a hand on her back, his gaze fixed on the horizon where Anna's car had disappeared. In that moment, the mansion, once filled with echoes of loneliness, felt whole. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, built on trust, love, and the promise of a brighter future. In the sterile confines of his prison cell, Zachary Bryant sat on the edge of a metal cot, his once impeccable suit replaced with the dull grey of an inmate's uniform. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above him, a sharp contrast to the silence that had become his constant companion. A newspaper lay on the small table in the corner, its headline a cruel mockery of the empire he once controlled. Bryant Enterprises collapses amid scandal. Zachary Bryant faces multiple charges. He stared at the page, his hands gripping the edges tightly. The image of his own face stared back at him, hollow-eyed and broken. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, was gone. Zachary's thoughts turned bitterly to Anna, that small, fragile girl who had never looked at him with the reverence he demanded. She had been a burden, a stray element in his meticulously crafted life. And yet, it was her existence, and Kenneth White's defiance, that had unraveled him. He let the paper fall to the floor, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his failures. For the first time, the echoes of his choices felt deafening. The atmosphere at Kenneth's mansion was completely different from Zachary's desolation. Laughter echoed through the sunlit halls as Samuel arrived with Anna for a weekend visit. Her face lit up the moment she saw Claire standing at the top of the staircase. "Claire!" Anna squealed, racing up the steps and throwing her arms around her. Claire laughed, ruffling Anna's hair. "Took you long enough to get here." Samuel followed with a warm smile, setting a small duffel bag by the door. "I told her we'd get here early, but she wanted to bring something for the garden." Anna held up a small pot of lavender, her cheeks pink with excitement. "For the fountain," she explained. Kenneth stepped out from his study, his gaze softening at the scene before him. "Lavender, huh? A good choice," he said with a nod. "Can we plant it now?" Anna asked, her wide eyes darting between Kenneth and Claire. "Of course," Kenneth said. "Claire, why don't you help her?" Claire took Anna's hand, leading her toward the garden. Kenneth and Samuel stood by the doorway, watching as the two girls disappeared into the sunlight. "She seems happy," Samuel said, his voice low. "She is," Kenneth replied, his tone steady. She's starting to heal. Samuel turned to him, gratitude etched into his features. Thank you, Kenneth, for everything you've done for her, and for Claire. Kenneth shook his head. You don't need to thank me. They've done just as much for me. Later that evening, the family gathered around the dining table. The warm glow of the chandelier illuminated their laughter as Anna recounted her adventures with Samuel. Kenneth sat back, his eyes drifting between the three of them. After dinner, Samuel prepared to leave, but Anna lingered in the doorway, her small hand clasping Claire's. I'll see you next weekend, she promised. And you better call me before then, Claire teased, her voice light but affectionate. As Samuel and Anna drove off, Kenneth turned to Claire. She's lucky to have you, he said. Claire glanced at him, a rare softness in her gaze. We're all lucky to have each other, she said quietly. Kenneth smiled faintly, nodding. You're right. The following week, Kenneth finalized the adoption paperwork. The process, though meticulous, felt natural, as though it had been the missing piece in their lives all along. When the final document was signed, Claire stood beside him, her usual guarded expression replaced with tentative joy. You're officially stuck with me now, Kenneth said, his tone light. Claire smirked, but her eyes shone with emotion. I think I can live with that. That evening, Kenneth, Claire and Anna sat together in the garden, the lavender plant thriving near the fountain. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of shared laughter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kenneth looked at the two girls beside him. This wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't the solitary, controlled existence he had built for himself. But it was better. It was whole. And as Anna leaned against Claire, her small laugh echoing in the warm air, Kenneth felt a quiet peace settle over him, a promise of a future filled with hope, healing, and the strength of their chosen family. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.